I am so happy, and thanks for attending us tonight. I know it's been a crazy week for a lot of people, for a lot of different things, so we just want to acknowledge what everyone's trying to hold on to, and as well as the seasons changing. All right, so before I begin, I just want to share that it was really exciting when I first got introduced to Sutton. It was a surprise for me, but also one of those like, God, the brilliance of our women and the people who we know or don't know yet is just so profound. I was lucky to be introduced to Sutton by our friend, colleague, and brother, Edgar Villanueva, and he had just met her recently. And he called me, we were talking about a project, and all he could say was, by the way, I met someone who's doing so many things, who's building, creating, and is like deep in the investment space. And he's like, she has so much going on. It was hard to keep it all together. He goes, a lot like you all at Native Women Lead. And I was like, what? Kindred spirit? 100%. How do I meet her? And so Seth and I connected. And I think within the first 10 minutes, we were crying and also, sharing, as well as just getting straight into like how difficult this is to do this work, to try to build solutions that have meaning, that connect to who you are, and just how sometimes it's lonely because we're constantly having to face communities and places where we are oftentimes the only Indigenous people and 100% probably the only Indigenous women in these rooms. So her story has continued to inspire me, and you will get to know Sutton more over time, because I think there's so much opportunity to work together. But I just had to share. Let me tell you who Sutton is. So Sutton King, she's an MPH. She's an Afro-Indigenous of the Menominee and Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. She is an Indigenous health advocate, researcher, and social entrepreneur dedicated to developing and scaling innovative solutions to improve Indigenous health equity across sectors. Her focus centers decolonial approaches and culturally appropriate methodologies within technology, healthcare, and business. She supports research to increase the visibility surrounding Indigenous health outcomes and access to mental health care for urban natives through her role as president and executive director of Urban Indigenous Collective, a grassroots organization dedicated to the health and well-being of urban natives, and is also co-founder of Shock Talk, a telebehavioral application connecting native users to native therapists. Just so many snaps for that. She's the chief impact officer for Journey Collab, a biotech company decolonizing their approach to drug development. In her role as Chief Impact Officer for Journey Collab, she supports the design and implementation of a stakeholder model and ensures a social impact through company accountability. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome Sutton up here and to share her journey in the work. Thank you for joining us today, Sutton.
Wayne and Yako. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for having me. Like you shared, the first conversation we had, it was just like sparks were flying and breakthroughs were happening. There were so many aha moments, and it just felt really good to be seen and to really be heard. And to really be able to talk to someone who understands a lot of the barriers that we face as Indigenous women in this space. And also a woman who is a trailblazer and is, leading the way here in the way that we're thinking about entrepreneurship, and the way that we're thinking about investment, and the way that we're thinking about bringing our cultural ways of being and knowing into our work and our passion. And so I just want to thank the entire Native Women Lead team for having me here. Thank you, Jennifer, Vanessa, Jamie, Ari, thank you all. And with that, we can go ahead and get into the presentation. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it. Poso, Shokoli, Sutton King, Nukats, Ungwehowe, Ni'i, Wagneta Nawagitalota, Oniota Aga Ni'i. So hello, my name is Sutton King. I am Turtle Clan. I am of the Oneida Nation. I spoke in the my Oneida language. Where my English name is Sutton King, my native name is Noctau Pianuki, and that means comes first woman, and that is my Menominee name. So today, what I'm really going to be sharing with you is just my story and how that story has really impacted and influenced the work that I choose to really dedicate my life to. And it really feels like a blessing. I have a lot of gratitude to be able to walk in my purpose and be able to bring my cultural ways into the work that I steward into community. We'll talk about how legal structures can support the values and the work that you do, and how I've applied decolonial approaches and culturally appropriate methodologies within healthcare, business, and technology. So I'll kind of take you through my journey of how I got here today. And so, as it was shared, I'm Afro-Indigenous. I'm of the Menominee and Oneida Nations of Wisconsin. In undergrad, I studied psychology and sociology, and I received a master's in public health, focusing on global health from NYU School of Global Public Health. I've really, as Vanessa shared, dedicated my career to really developing innovative solutions that we can scale that can improve Indigenous health equity across sectors. And so, really, I came to Lenape-Hoking, so-called New York City, about 10 years ago. And to really better understand, I think, both the historical and intergenerational trauma that my family has experienced, as well as myself and other Indigenous peoples in my community. And it was really through studying psychology, I was really able to understand the implications of having to walk in two worlds, right? And what that truly means, and understanding that there's a name for that, acculturation. My career really began in the startup tech space, leading the development of the first culturally tailored trauma-informed simulation and suicide prevention technology for natives. And I implemented that within over 80 tribes. That work really was exciting. It was the first time that I was able to really see our ways of being and knowing implemented into a mainstream technology platform, which was very exciting for me. And I remember thinking, yeah, my name is, Noctau Pinuki, comes first woman, but why is it that our communities are the last to receive this innovative technology to support the healing required to really thrive? And at that point, that was 2015 to 2018, that technology was being implemented throughout Indian country. And I just remember thinking that this is so innovative. It's so exciting. I remember going actually to Unity, which is a conference that unites, over 2,000 Indigenous youth, and being able to share these suicide prevention technologies and trauma-informed prevention technologies, these applications that folks are able to engage with, and just hearing the personal stories and hearing the excitement and how widely used these technologies were used and being leveraged. It was really a shame when that funding was pulled upon the Trump administration coming in. And unfortunately, those technologies sit on a shelf. But kind of putting a pin in that and thinking, I'm gonna come back to that. So after doing that work, I then became the director of a New York City federal urban Indian health program called the New York Indian Council, which services one of the largest populations of urban natives in the country, with outreach and referral services. And that was really exciting to be able to come down to a local level and really be in community with my urban native community. We saw a lot of gaps there as well, right? And we'll jump more into that as we go into the presentation. But I remember really wanting to see a program for urban natives by urban natives, ground in community voice, really ground in consent, and really ground in our ways of being and knowing that are actually supporting us in a way that is taking us to, again, a level of thriving and not just survival, which, again, I feel like an outreach and referral program can be very limited in its capacity to support urban natives and what we really need in terms of looking at just the impact of the different health consequences we're burdened with. So currently, I support research to increase the visibility surrounding Indigenous health outcomes and access to healthcare, specifically mental health care access for urban natives. And I'm really doing this through my roles as the co-founder and president of the Urban Indigenous Collective, as well as the co-founder of Shock Talk. And so the Urban Indigenous Collective really is a grassroots organization dedicated to the health and well-being of urban natives, whereas the Shock Talk application is a telebehavioral app that connects Native users and Native therapists. And we're going to go through each of those businesses what we're doing with them right now, how we've structured them, and kind of what our vision for the long term is for those corporations. And then, as well as my role as Chief Impact Officer of our journey Collab, we're really looking at how we can, again, decolonize pharmaceutical company in a way where we can leverage a stakeholder model to really ensure that Indigenous peoples are being a part of the wealth creation that's being generated. So it's really innovative ways of thinking, but we'll discover as we talk that these are our ways of thinking and our ways of being and knowing. So I think it's to understand really why I've built my business and our businesses and the way that we have and the way that I have, especially in terms of the way that I've developed programming within UIC. It's really important to understand my ancestry. It's important to understand my story and my experiences because the way that I have built these structures to support these visions are very intentional in the way that they're really bringing in, I would say, a lot of concepts that I grew up learning and knowing from my connection to my indigeneity. So it's important to share that aspect of myself. And so on my Menominee side, I am the granddaughter of the last chiefs of my tribe. I come from a long line of leaders. And it was really important for me to understand their ways and the things that they've done historically. And so you'll see there on the right-hand side, sitting there is Chief Oshkosh, who is my grandfather. And in his lap is my grandfather as well. And so I was very proud growing up, knowing my lineage, knowing my ancestry, knowing that I come from such a strong, resilient community, right? And I think it's really interesting where Chief Oshkosh, Braveheart, the first, he was really able to walk in two worlds, right? And I share this because I think this is something that is a skill that I have as well, right? And I'd like to imagine perhaps I've got that skill from him, but he was able to walk in two worlds where he was able to really actually speak English, right? And also speak our native language that allowed him to barter with the United States government, right? To ensure that our people had what we needed to survive at that time, where the United States government wanted to relocate us. They wanted to move us north. And, he went and visited those lands and he knew that we would not survive there, right? And what would that mean for our people and the 7 generations? And I'll talk about that 7 generation principle also. But being able to walk in both worlds and slowly seed the acres of our land, right? Where our ancestral lands, where our creation story started. And he was able to do that slowly. And with that, we are, one of the few tribes who are currently on our ancestral lands. Him really being strategic and walking in both worlds and really making sure that thinking about the sustainability component of having community, again, where our creation story starts, where our relationship with land is and the water, and knowing that, again, it would be to our detriment to have to leave. And so I think also him really understanding the importance of culture is something that has really stuck with me, right? Why it's important to be within community, why it's important to have that safety net. And then there's Chief Reginald Oshkosh, who you see in this picture right here. And so, looking at his history and letters that he wrote to his children who were sent to Carlisle Indian School, I'm able to read through letters where he's begging teachers to send his children back to our lands because our culture is the best education for them, and that that this would be better for them in the long term. And reading those letters really impacted me in a profound way. Knowing my upbringing, being in Oneida daycare at an early age, learning how to read in my language, learning how to pray in my language. That gave me such a profound sense of self-efficacy, confidence, parts of me that I think have contributed to my resiliency and being able to really overcome a lot of the different adversities I've been faced with. And so on my Oneida side, share that, we're part of what's called the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as Haudenosaunee. And so really, very quickly, it's really 6 New York nations who banded together in unity to fight westward expansion and settler colonialism. And it's really interesting where when you look at the ways that our communities were structured, we are truly the first original innovators, right? When we think about how we have really created governance structures. When we look at our Constitution, for example, the United States Constitution, right? We know that it is largely based on concepts that the Haudenosaunee developed. It's widely documented, right? The Haudenosaunee have had the oldest democracy on earth, right? And knowing that our ancestry comes from those who were able to innovate again and develop these governance structures that mirrored our ways of being and knowing really gives me this confidence that we can bring our ways of being and knowing into legal structures, into the Western world, into mainstream models. Right now, you know, we look at different business structures and we call them alternative business models. And it's really my, I think, plight to make a stakeholder model. We'll talk more about that, the baseline, right? And so really knowing, you know, these different teachings and learnings from my own ancestry, it really brings me to two principles that were shared to me growing up. And that's one, which is the 7th generation principle, right, which I talked about, that the decisions that we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future, right? And then the kinship principle, where many of our communities lived in kinship societies, right, that were based on this concept of interdependentness, which required all beings, both animate and inanimate, to work in relation to really achieve harmony with Mother Earth. And it's really through this dynamic that everyone understood the responsibility and obligation to be a good relative to one another, and really made sure that everyone who was affected by the decision had a seat at the table to be able to voice their concern and were listened to by leaders who were the primary facilitators and who were ultimately responsible to the people. And so really through kinship leadership ensured that everyone was taken care of. And so I think that when I think about business, this is the principles that I'm holding at the forefront when I'm thinking about how we structure this to ensure that all stakeholders have a seat at the table. All stakeholders are a part of the wealth that's created if it's a for-profit company. And how do we ensure that there are mechanisms that ensure that all stakeholders are being able to co-create and co-develop the business. Again, whether that's for-profit or not for profit, there are protocols and ways in which we can do this. And I'll share very last, the condor and the eagle. That's something that I learned while growing up. I'm sure many of you have heard of all of these principles and philosophies as well. But really that eagle and condor prophecy that speaks to the Americas really splitting into two, and that of the eagle, the West, and the condor of the South. And that the path of the condor really being seen as this path of the heart, the intuition, the indigeneity, and then really the path of the eagle more of being the mind, the industrial, the masculine, which could often be seen as like the Western lens. And knowing that in that 500 years, these paths would come together and we'd be able to achieve harmony and balance. And really, you know, this prophecy is the way in which I'm really wanting to push forward culturally appropriate methodologies and decolonial ways of building our businesses in the way that we think about them. And this really just requires valuing and revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and really just weeding out those different settler biases or assumptions. So again, these are just the different ways or the different principles and philosophies that I'm thinking about when I'm building businesses and building programming. So when we think about our ways of being and knowing, right, the 7th generation principle, that is sustainability, right? And there are ways in which we can incorporate that with a nonprofit or a for-profit. And the for-profit, that can be incorporated through a stakeholder model, right? And the stakeholder theory is a view of capitalism that really stresses the interconnected relationship between a business and its customers, its suppliers, employees, investors, its communities, all of those who have stake in the organization. And it just really argues that a firm should create value for all stakeholders and not just shareholders, where the for-profit mantra really has been profit maximization strategies and really only thinking about those shareholder primacy as a way of moving forward. But actually, what we've seen is the business roundtable come out in 2019 and say, we back the stakeholder model. And I would argue that the stakeholder model is very much so our ways of being and knowing, as we have made sure to distribute wealth in a way that supports all stakeholders, right? If we think about the potluck, something that the Plains natives do, right? How we bring foods together to make sure that everybody has a plate, everybody is fed. And again, these are our ways of being and knowing. So it's really exciting as I am a budding entrepreneur and coming into the space. I'm really thinking about these concepts and how we can bring them to the forefront and really share in a way with folks in the Western world so that it translates into their language, right? And when we think about kinship principle, we're really talking about the buzzwords of DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Making sure that we're being good relatives to one another, making sure that folks are represented, folks have a seat at the table, folks are being not only having a seat at the table, but folks are also being heard, right? And then we think about the way that businesses are being built. Consent has always been a protocol of Indigenous communities, right? And that can be seen in the way that needs assessments are created before a business is launched, or free, prior, and informed consent, which is a United Nations, comes from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that shows a pathway on how we have meaningful consultation to build companies that will have an impact on Indigenous peoples. And then again, that condor and the eagle, looking at that prophecy and really seeing that being the basis for the need for culturally tailored services. And again, those decolonial approaches. And so these are kind of just the ways that I'm thinking about it as I'm walking in the space. So really, again, how do we adapt the legal structures to align with your needs? Right now, I'm really going to be just talking about corporations, for-profit and not-for-profit, where the for-profit, it's really profits earned for the benefits of business owners or shareholders, and not-for-profits, money raised to continue the mission of the organization. Now, I think that there's an opportunity to leverage both, and I think there's an opportunity to bring our ways of being and knowing into each, and I'm going to really walk you through just 3 different businesses, the Urban Indigenous Collective, Shock Talk, and Journey Collab, and the ways that we have really centered reciprocity, the ways that we have centered a stakeholder model, and the way that we're really leveraging equity as ownership, as that is, I think, the real way to really include folks in your business. And I think that for the for-profit, it requires innovation, right? We know that there are a lot of barriers to scaling for-profits, particularly I think around funding, right? We see a lot of issues there, especially with the 0.4%, I believe it is, that's allocated through philanthropic dollars to Indigenous initiatives. And then I believe it's 20% is actually allocated from private foundations. So really having a small pool in that bucket, right? And that really can create a lot of issues in terms of scarcity mentality. It can cause a lot of issues with lateral violence. And then it can cause a lot of issues of just sustainability, right? How do we scale the nonprofit to make sure that it's around for 7 generations? And so I'll talk to you all about just kind of how we're thinking about incorporating Shock Talk and how we can really ensure that Shock Talk can support our nonprofit, right? And how we're really taking a for-profit model and allocating equity to create this kind of mutual aid, if you will. And then for the not-for-profit, right? It's really, again, looking at those alternative business models that exist and how we leverage those. So for the for-profit, we're looking at stakeholder models today and how we can really bring that to the forefront to make sure that wealth is being distributed equitably. And then for the not-for-profit, how we're leveraging technology to bring in another source of income and funding outside of grant dollars, outside of foundation, to really be able to scale as well. So we'll go ahead and jump into those businesses. I could not do this without an unimaginable, inspiring team of Indigenous advocates from many different nations and backgrounds. It is truly our passion for urban natives that brings us all together, and really our passion to advocate on behalf of urban natives to ensure that we have what we require here in Lenape-Hoking in the greater New York City area. So UIC was really developed by urban natives who have recognized a gap in culturally tailored healthcare services for urban natives who live here, understanding that the inequalities that burden urban natives like ourselves, it's our mission really to bring the gap of health inequalities that exist to a close for those living along the Eastern Seaboard. And so we have an amazing team again that have come from NYU, Columbia, Hunter, MIT, Georgetown, really who found themselves in this large city with an ill-equipped healthcare infrastructure. And we'll really walk through the need and why UIC is really at the forefront in research, data collection, and positioning ourselves to become a culturally tailored healthcare clinic here in New York City. And so really, let's bring in our ways of being and knowing, right? It's important that if we are going to be community-based and community-led, that we have a mechanism that ensures that we are consulting continuously with our community advisory board that represents our tri-state area and many different Indigenous nations within. It's very important to make sure that we have the wisdom of our elders in community and the wisdom of our youth here in community. So you will see a very diverse community advisory board on our website, ranging from many ages, nations, and levels of expertise and background. Our board of directors is Indigenous led. And they are really, I would say, inspiring folks in the space who have dedicated their careers to healthcare and really reimagining and revising what capitalism looks like for Indigenous-led initiatives. And then our Executive Leadership Council, which is also Indigenous-led, which is also very important to us to ensure that, again, we're bringing a variety of perspectives to our programming and the way that we're building and are structuring our governance. There's a lot of different principles and teachings that we all have learned individually that we bring collectively to the space and really weave into our programming and our different methodologies, and again, creating our structure. So the mission, so we're driving the inclusion of urban natives by indigenizing existing infrastructures and really ensuring cultural humility in health and wellness services to build more equitable, inclusive, and prosperous communities. So really we're devoting our advocacy in support of just quality and accessible, affordable health and wellness services that are grounded in cultural humility for all urban natives living within the tri-state area. And, you know, it's really our vision to be able to be in a world, to come into a world where our Indigenous rights and sovereignties are being acknowledged and respected, irrespective of borders. We know that the fiduciary duty of the United States government is to all natives, regardless if they're on reservations or not. And so we want to ensure that urban natives are being included and are being thought of when we are coming into the city and, you know, coming into community. So ways in which we are, you know, bringing our own experiences into the way we're building this, right? Starting with our definition, right? So our definition of urban natives is meant to be inclusive and decolonizes the federal definition of what it means to be an urban Indian. And really by creating our own definition, we've expanded our reach in potential services. And we acknowledge that to be a self-identifying Native, you don't need to be a member of a federal or state recognized tribe, meaning you don't need to meet blood quantum criteria. And because many of us come from different nations, are mixed blood, me, I'm Afro-Indigenous, we understand the implications of being tied to an organization that is limited to the federal definition, and what that means specifically for urban natives who, again, have been relocated, many who don't have documentation, or many who may just be mixed blood and may not meet the certain amounts of blood quantum for services by Urban Indian Health Program or Indian Health Service. So for me, example, you know, I am able to receive healthcare from IHS, but if my partner is not Native and the children that I have, or their blood quantum is not increased by a Native partner, they won't be able to receive any benefits. And so, again, we just see a lot of barriers to accessing healthcare for a lot of urban natives and a lot of mixed blood natives like myself. So I touched on that, to really look at sustainability in a for-profit, that you're going to have to get innovative, right? Historically, nonprofits I touched on have relied heavily on grants for sustainability, which again has led to several challenges in long-term healthcare services. We've got the historical underfunding, again, that I mentioned from the philanthropic sector. We've got the instability in year-over-year funding levels. And then again, what we see from grant dollars, from foundations to community causes, with that only being, as I shared, 20%. So our model of sustainability really focuses on our tech arm and developing digital startups. Like I mentioned, Shock Talk, which we'll jump into Shock Talk and I'll share more about what Shock Talk is. But we're allocating equity to UIC for community programming and services. So the profits from the technology we develop sustain the services we provide, right? So you see in this diagram, we have we're looking at donations, we're looking at grant dollars, we're looking at government contracts, and we're looking at for-profit tech startups. And that's different, right? We haven't seen that before, but we see just a large opportunity in the tech space for culturally tailored technology for Indigenous peoples. And we feel like we have a team who can create this technology. So why not, while we're creating and leveraging this innovative technology, make sure that that for-profit model is a stakeholder model that allocates money back to community members, back to community organizations, back to tribal nations, to create a pathway of sustainable revenue. And with that, we're able to, with our larger vision, create jobs and employment. We are able to actually offer an employee a full-time position at UIC for the first time last week, and so that was really exciting for us. We're able to lead in Indigenous-led research. And we'll talk about just the different research projects we're looking at. And then we're able to provide technical assistance. And the larger goal here being direct services, right? We're creating an organization, we're 2 years old, that can really be sustainable to provide culturally tailored direct services in the long term, and really thinking about how we diversify these funding streams to ensure that in 7 generations, right, our communities have a healthcare center to fit their needs. And why is this so important, right? Many of you know in the audience, urban natives experience some of the most paramount burdens of disease and disability nationally. And in New York City, urban natives experience chronic and infectious adverse health disparities, mental health illness, and substance abuse addiction, which is perpetuated by poverty, racism, discrimination, and really just a lack of access to quality healthcare, services. And when we look at just some of these statistics here, it's not surprising to most of us. Most of us have experienced violence ourselves, know a family member who have experienced violence, has a mental health illness, or is a survivor of suicide, or has lost a relative to suicide, right? And so really looking at these statistics that we all know too commonly, it is necessary that there is an organization that is here in New York City that is fighting on the behalf of urban natives and advocating to access to those resources. We'll really see just this breakdown where 71% of natives now live in urban areas, right? And knowing that we're born with this legal right to health care, which is based on treaties, which our tribes and nations exchanged our land and natural resources for healthcare. And we are really stuck with this Indian Health Service, which has been grossly underfunded, right? And is tasked to improving the health of natives, irrespective of those borders, right? And as a result of termination, relocation era, boarding school, many of our tribal members, as I touched on, were moved into urban areas, which shows us this 71% that we're looking at right here on that screen. And in New York City, we have over 100,000 self-identifying Indigenous folks, right? But you'll see One, that's here on the right, we have 0 culturally tailored healthcare centers that are providing direct services. And there's a huge gap, right? And when we look at the funding within Indian Health Service, we see that they're only dedicating 1 to 2% of their budget to urban Indian health programs, which is not reflecting that true need. Moreover, many of those urban Indian health programs have limited capacity. Like I had shared, the urban program I was the director of, only ever reaching this outreach and referral capacity. What is actually needed is that third tier, which is that full comprehensive ambulatory care clinic, which UIC is again positioning ourselves to become. So you'll see right here, New York, we have the outreach and referral. So that's New York City. Again, outreach referral, first tier. Out in Long Island, about 3 hours from New York City, you've got the Shinnecock Indian Health Service. However, that only serves Shinnecock members, so it's not intertribal. And then you'll see in Oneida, New York, you do have an intertribal healthcare clinic, but that is a 4-hour drive. So for me, coming into New York City, 18 years old, I have chronic kidney disease, and not having access to Indian Health Service healthcare facility where my costs can be covered actually put me into a position of a financial burden where I found myself tens of thousands of dollars in medical debt, which was very hard for me as a young person coming to a large metro city, experiencing this financial burden, experiencing these stressors related to walking in both worlds, which I soon learned was called acculturation through my psychology program, right? And the effects of the effects that has on your mental health, the effects that has on your academic performance, right? And how susceptible you can become to predators as well. And so with that, again, I graduated with a lot of medical debt, and I was also subjected to trafficking. It's a little difficult to talk about, but these compounding factors, right? My chronic illness, my mental health, and not having access to the appropriate healthcare and mental health support, right? And not having community, right? And struggling to find that and build that really created this gap, which led me to be very vulnerable, right? But as a survivor, I can take these experiences and remember them when I'm building these businesses, to consider what we can do to ensure that that doesn't happen to other Indigenous women or relatives coming into our community. And so with that, UIC has 4 focuses. We focus on Indigenous-led research, as I talked about, the technical assistance, innovating digital technology, and really direct services, which that is our long-term vision and really our goal. And so with the research, it's important to understand that relevant, high quality public health data about urban Indigenous populations is almost non-existent. Take it from me, I'm a research nerd. And when we don't have the proper data, we can't advocate for the proper resources. And so we really prioritize Indigenous-led research as one of our main areas of focus coming into community. So it was really important for us to launch within community voice. And so we launched Indigenous Peoples Day with a community health needs assessment to really be able to understand the needs, to really be able to understand from a quantitative perspective what folks had access to, what folks would like to see, and how satisfied folks were with the current services that were available in New York City. And you can imagine not very satisfied at all. And so again, this information helps us to really be able to frame and develop our programming. And we understand it's important not only to have that quantitative survey aspect, but also that qualitative aspect as well. And so that's why we've developed a community health forum. Unfortunately, with COVID, We had to put a pause on that. It was supposed to launch last year during this time. And now we've really had to reorganize to be able to do it in a digital first capacity. But we really want to make sure that we're capturing that qualitative data as well, right? Making sure we're understanding through dialogue, conversations, through stories, through experiences. So we can really have a comprehensive understanding of what the true need is when we're developing and stewarding UIC into community. Some other research that we're looking at, we have done a lot around the COVID-19, really looking at coping mechanism and factors. And we've actually published a research within the UCLA's Native American journal. So please check that out. We also have been funded to launch the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Trans, and Two-Spirit database, and I'll talk about that more in length. Around our education, we've done a lot, if you're on our social media, around COVID-19 vaccination campaigns. Really looking at COVID vaccination hesitancy, really educating around the historical trauma and why that hesitancy exists and the lack of trust and barriers there. As well as MMIP, we're really wanting to make sure that we're putting out resources that can support our communities before they become missing or murdered Indigenous women, girls, trans, or two-spirit people. And then looking at the digital technology, right? Shock Talk is our first startup that we created. And again, we did incorporate that as a for-profit outside of UIC. And it's been really exciting. We're MIT Indigenous Solve Fellows. We're NYU Female Founder Fellows. We've been in the NYU Ignite Alpha and Beta Fellowship, as well as the Blackstone and Techstarter Fellowship. And so this has really given us just a lot of confidence as a young Indigenous tech team who are thinking about innovative solutions to support a lot of our different health disparities. And it's giving us a lot of confidence and this model that we're creating, right, to really be able to bring our community the direct services that we hope will start supporting a lot of that historical and intergenerational trauma. So I want to talk about the first program that UIC was funded for, which is our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Trans, and Two-Spirit database. So for folks who don't know what MMIWG is, it's a human rights epidemic that has disproportionately affected Indigenous women, or Indigenous identifying women. And as I shared myself, I am a survivor. I'm a survivor of abuse and in multiple ways, a survivor of intimate partner violence. I'm a survivor of trafficking, and I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. And I'm also a relative of a missing and murdered Indigenous person who you see here on the screen. And her name was Ingrid Washington, Flying Eagle Woman. And it's important for me to always share just my story and my experience on why I'm so dedicated to this movement, why I'm so dedicated to increasing the visibility around this epidemic. And it's also very important for me to share that I believe that all work surrounding MMIP should be centered around survivors and family members of the missing and murdered. And so Ingrid, she was an internationally recognized environmental activist. She was a chair of the NGO Committee on the United Nations International Decade of the World's Indigenous Peoples. She was a delegate of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, and she was the NGO representative in consultative status actually for the UN's International Indian Treaty Council. She was a member of the UN Women's Working Group on Indigenous Peoples, and she really was just a tireless defender of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And my journey has been inspired by Ingrid, and knowing that this Menominee woman coming from my community, I was able to come to New York City, go to so many powerful places, and be able to do so many powerful things to unite Indigenous peoples globally. And so I think of Ingrid, and I think of all of the work she has done. And to be taken from us, she was taken from us in 1999 by FARC guerrillas, and I never had the opportunity to to meet Ingrid. However, I'm close to her son Maki and her husband Ali, who have always supported me here in New York City and are my only family members here in New York City. And I always told them, I'm going to create a nonprofit. And Ali always told me, you tell me when you're ready, and I'll be here to support you and teach you. And he did, and he has. And we're just really excited to be able to have funding from 7Gen to be able to steward this database in this way, and to really be able to honor Ingrid and honor all of the MMI Ps here in New York City in the tri-state area. So as it was shared, as we opened up with this presentation by Jennifer, and as I've touched on within this presentation, that with Native women, we suffer the highest rates of violence, and it far exceeds women of any other ethnicity within the US. And more than 4 in 5 Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. And we endure this violence on an extensive spectrum, from verbal abuse to murder. And murder is reported as the 3rd leading cause of death among our women. In some communities, Native women are murdered at a rate that is 10 times the national average. And violence perpetuated against Native women, again, is not restricted to the borders of reservations. And due to the lack of accurate and quality data collected as a result of really substandard data collection practices by law enforcement agencies of urban Native women, there's this false perception that has been constructed that really has suggested that violence does not affect Native women outside of federally defined tribal lands, and that's just not true. And the U.S. has an obligation, and to protect and support the well-being of Native women in this country. And again, that obligation arising from those treaties that we talked about, and that trust responsibility that the federal government took on when it appropriated Native people of their homelands. And despite the legal obligation of the U.S. to protect the human rights of Native women, it remains complicit in the violence targeting them by perpetuating inadequate data collection practices and remaining complicit in an institutional system that really has designed to marginalize and disfranchise Native women. And it really has denied Native women of our most basic human right, which is to be free of violence. And there's just really this dire need for more sustained, in-depth research on existing data collection practices for agencies that have a large urban Native population, and so that we can understand the violence against urban Native women. And so really, this is why we have decided to mobilize, to take action. And it's so important, again, that we are being funded to do this work. And we would do this work even if we weren't funded, but it is important to ensure that we're honoring the Indigenous women who are stewarding this database, and making sure that they don't become susceptible to the implications of economic hardship, like myself. I'll share, my inspiration, aside from Ingrid, has largely been Sovereign Bodies Institute. And Sovereign Bodies Institute holds the national database for MMIP. And they came out in community and collaboration with the Urban Indian Health Institute on an urban report. And when I looked at this report, I thought, wow, there are no cities along the Eastern Seaboard that are a part of this data report. And so again, it's perpetuating this false narrative. And my mom, actually, and she's here with us today. Hey, Mom. She saw Anita Lucchesi, the executive director of Sovereign Bodies Institute, who's also a survivor of trafficking, talking about the database, talking about her work, and talking about her story. And my mom, being the only one who knew about my story, and always being, Mama Bear in that rock, said, I think you should listen to this woman and listen to her story and listen to what she's doing around this issue. And it was so inspiring. It was so inspiring to see a survivor come to the forefront of this movement. And it was so inspiring to see a survivor who has a master's degree, who is educated, and a survivor who is able to create a business to support Indigenous peoples. And that was something that I wanted to do. And so I began looking at data when I was at NYU. During my master's, I started taking different classes to learn about grant writing. Actually, full circle, the grant writing class that I took at NYU, I used this grant that we have as a practice almost, right? So I used it with the intention that maybe one day this grant would be funded by a funder organization or agency. And so again, full circle to actually be able to take a lot of that language from that practice grant, if you will, and be able to actually use it and be funded for this work. So what is this database? What does it do? It really seeks to document the scope of violence experienced by Native and Indigenous women in New York City and the tri-state area from 1900 to present. And so we really developed a coordinated marketing and recruitment plan incorporating various social media platforms, print media, audiovisual, and performance art methods. So we've collaborated with a bunch of different urban, Indigenous nonprofits here in New York City who also do work around MMIP, but just in a different way, right? And our advocacy for MMIP can show up in a number of ways. And so it's really exciting to really bring the data nerds, UIC, and collaborate with the Safe Harbors Indigenous Collective, which are the theatric arts folks, and be able to create marketing that increases the visibility of what we're trying to do around this database and the importance of it, right? So a part of this project requires building a task force that is composed of individuals who have lived experience to the project. So whether they're survivors of violence or have family members who are survivors or are MMIP, it's really important that we make sure that, again, this is being grounded in community voice and in survivors' voices. Aside from creating the task force, we are also filing Freedom of Information requests, a FOIA requests. And so those Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed to request data again from 1900 to present. And we are requesting from all police departments. We've requested over 54 requests. Not surprisingly so, NYPD has denied our request, stating they don't track race, which is what is problematic, right? And so by being able to send out these FOIA requests, be able to understand what are the barriers to accessing this data, whether it's they don't track the data or they just don't want to share it with us, we are going to be able to create a report, write recommendations, and increase a lot of visibility around what needs to be implemented to make sure that these substandard data collection practices aren't reoccurring. So another part of this project that's very important is that we've been compiling legislation and policies regarding MMIP on a local, state, and national level. So we're currently drafting and sending letters to state representatives through New York with the ultimate goal to create a statewide MMIP task force in New York to really increase awareness, to really garner their continued support and collaboration. And so this policy tracker will actually be up on our website at the end of next month. So really excited to be able to share that so folks have a visualization on just where we're at and where we're going. That is really kind of just an overview of who UIC is and the way we've structured our organization. There's other programs that were funded to support. We just got news, I'll share, that were funded for Indigenous Mentorship Circle, which will support Indigenous women who are coming into New York City for higher education with a stipend and mentorship from our organization. Again, to make sure we're creating those safety nets for Indigenous women, and we're making sure they have resources, economic resources to support them while they're here in the city, as well as community through our leadership team, our community advisory, and our board they will have access to. So I talked about Shock Talk, and I haven't gotten to the weeds of it yet. So I really want to make sure we dive into Shock Talk and what that is. So Shock Talk, what is it? It seeks to decrease adverse mental health effects in Native American and Alaska Natives by connecting users to Native therapists that are trained and experienced in cultural humility through a telebehavioral application. And so really by providing access to culturally appropriate telebehavioral and wellness services, we're really wanting to increase the usage among our community and decrease mental health disparities. So we're designing Shock Talk specifically for our communities, built with crisis response in mind, facilitated by a culturally appropriate matching algorithm. How did we get here? Where is it at? What does it do, right? So on-demand crisis support. It's so important. We know that we are suffering paramount amounts of disease when it comes to mental health, when it comes to chronic illness, and it's important that our communities have access to therapists on demand. And so that's really how we're building this out. We think that it's really important that there's not just the talk spaces and the teletalks and the telezocs and what have you, that there is a platform dedicated specifically to Indigenous peoples that ensures that there are clinicians who are trained to support us. Because a lot of times, often than not, what happens is we go into the space to look for clinicians, find a clinician, oftentimes is not Indigenous, is not a BIPOC folk, and ultimately become re-traumatized in the process. So we're really seeking to remove that. And so how did this begin? So our listening to our customer discovery, we really I'll say it, let me take a step back. So our customer discovery has been key to our development. And again, this is, I would say, tech terms for consultation as protocol, as Indigenous people would say, right? And when we came into the space, we listened to understand and not reply. And so in doing so, we really consulted with over 70 Native users and 70 clinicians. Indigenous peoples, we see ongoing consultation and co-creation as protocol, and we value this framework, right? And this is our ways. And so this is our ways of developing solutions. So customer exploration is something that we're familiar with. It's, again, protocol to consult with elders in our communities before we make decisions that affect our future generations. And so through this process, we actually quickly learned that we needed to pivot our initial product idea to meet the true need of our community. And our initial product idea was to create a social media app that connected folks and brought news and content and resources in one integrated platform. But what we realized is that folks were actually leaving social media because they were being traumatized by the content that they were being exposed to. And it was quickly through, it just became clear that the social media product just wouldn't meet our community needs. And so that idea quickly went out of the window. And then we shifted to thinking more about the more impactful ways we could not only support our community's mental health, but actually connect them to treatment. And so in the solution involved connecting Native users to this app you see here. And so this is what we would like to be able to launch into community. And we think it's really important that, when we look at all of the barriers to accessing mental health and mental health clinicians, what we were finding in our interviews is that, folks would go on to websites like Psychology Today, find a bunch of clinicians, look through them all and find, okay, here are 5 that I'd like to talk with, and then quickly find out that they don't take your insurance or they're not accepting new patients, right? And then they were giving up. So that's when our customer was becoming exhausted. So we realized that it was important for us to create an app that has a culturally tailored matching algorithm. So what is that? Specific questions on how you want to be communicated with, what are important for you, what type of factors, protective factors are important for you to see within your clinician, being able to choose maybe what region in which you want your clinician to come from, what type of background they have. Perhaps you want someone who comes from maybe the same region or area that you come from, who may better understand your ways of being or knowing. We're going to be able to allow that through that matching algorithm, which is implemented through a survey in the beginning when you sign up. So it's really exciting to really start building this out. Our larger vision here is for it to be backed by Medicaid, right? We should not be having to pay for culturally tailored mental health care support. This should be a part of that sacred bargain that the United States government made to us. And so we're really looking to make sure as we build out the infrastructure for profits and how this can be sustainable, that we're thinking about those who do not have access to cash to be able to use technology like this. So really this last, I would say 8 months has been building out a platform, which we would call a concierge, to be able to test this, to be able to get to a proof of concept. And so Shaco AI, which is artificial intelligence, actually is an assistant that connects with users through the digital channels that are most commonly used by our Indigenous communities, such as Facebook Messenger, SMS, iMessage, and more. And after reaching out to Shaco through the user's preferred channel, what happens is that you're actually you schedule a Zoom intake appointment with the next available Indigenous social worker, which we have created that pool of Indigenous social workers who can be the facilitators in getting you to a clinician that meets your need. So we're leveraging different technologies to support this integration. So using, if you are familiar with Calendly, we've been able to really bring in Calendly within our Zendesk operation to create this stack, to leverage existing technologies to be able to facilitate the sustainable patient-provider relationship. Again, this is just the concierge, in which we would call the minimal viable product, right? What you saw in that first screenshot is that application. We want to build a telebehavioral application. That's, what our community truly needs. But in tech startups, it's really important to be able to gather enough data to show that your concept is viable, right? That it works, that there is a need within your user base to leverage this type of technology. And we know that there is a need, and we know that there is going to definitely be a large use of this when we implement our beta pilot testing, which actually will be kicking off in 1 month. So we're really excited to start really being able to look at user testing and really be able to look at just our network of Indigenous therapists and our network of Indigenous users who want to be a part of this journey that we are embarking on with our technology startup, which is very exciting. And this is kind of just the back end where social workers are able to keep track of tickets right now. So while we're connecting those users to therapists, we're able to track all the data so that we're able to revise our pitch deck, bring this data in, be able to talk to just the efficacy of this type of treatment, really be able to look at implementing a pre and post and follow-up for folks who are using the beta, to be, again, able to garner enough data to go into fundraising confidently and really be able to support our business thesis, which is that if a technology like this exists, users will come and users will use it. And we're really excited to be able to prove that. Last but not least, so again, I do wear many hats here. And so another startup that I'm a part of is called Journey Collab. And Journey Collab is taking psychedelic therapies through FDA, starting with mescaline. Mescaline is a synthetic compound as well as 5-MeO-DMT. These will be used really to treat mental health disorders. So really looking at treating this medical assisted therapy when we're looking at addiction. So it's important to acknowledge that when we're building what is to be an ethical psychedelic company that can scale these transformational, which people will call them technologies, right? For us, they're called plant medicine, right? But it's important that we're able to build it in a way that respects Indigenous ways of culture, being, and knowing, that recognizes that these, even though the company is taking synthetic compounds through FDA, that these compounds come from naturally occurring plants, which are our plant medicine, right? Which have been stewarded and protected for time immemorial, specifically talking about San Pedro or peyote. Now, again, it's important to emphasize that this is only synthetic, but there is an obligation and a responsibility to Indigenous peoples who have again been alienated from the profits that have been generated from plant medicine companies like the cannabis industry, right? And so I think where we're at with the psychedelic space is maybe where we were in 2015 with cannabis. And I think it's very important that we ensure that it's not business as usual and that we're able to create immense value for all shareholders, right? And those shareholders are also Indigenous peoples. And so it's really leveraging a stakeholder model, right? A stakeholder model that can return profits to all shareholders. And those shareholders include the employees, the investors, and for the communities which the therapeutics come from, which are Indigenous communities. And we're doing that through our Journey Reciprocity Trust. And this slide right here is just to show that stakeholder models, they've been regarded as alternative business models, but they're not that alternative. There are a lot of successful companies in the space that are using stakeholder models like Airbnb, like OutSchool, that have allocated either a percentage of their equity for their teachers, for a teacher fund, or for different stakeholders that support their larger ecosystem. And again, going back to the beginning of my presentation, when I talked about a stakeholder model, the fundamental pinnings of the stakeholder model are our principles of kinship, are our principles of the seventh generation, right? Making sure that we are distributing wealth equitably, and making sure that all stakeholders have a seat at the table and are being heard, right? And are a part of that profit that's being created. How are we making sure that our stakeholders within this business are being aligned with the company's values and are being a part of the co-creation and co-collaboration? And so again, for us, that is the Indigenous communities in which the medicine comes from, and the therapists who are going to be creating the safe container to make sure that there is no re-traumatization happening. That's making sure that there is no cultural appropriation happening in the way that we're creating the safe container for these medicines to be stewarded within community. And then our community partners. There's a lot of nonprofits in the space who have been doing really great work to steward plant medicine in an intentional and thoughtful way. And I think that we can learn a lot from them. And so by being able to give them equity, to be able to learn from their approach of community participatory research practices can only strengthen our approach. And some people ask, why didn't you create Journey Collab as a for-profit or a nonprofit? And the answer to that is it's just really difficult to scale a nonprofit pharmaceutical company where it's required, there's a lot of capital that's required to take compounds through FDA. And so we foresaw ourselves running into a lot of barriers in our series B, C, and D as a nonprofit. And so our solution was to be able to create a stakeholder model that was able to allocate a portion of the equity to a trust that supports Indigenous communities, and to really put aside a bucket of equity for community partners to support stewarding and learning from folks who are doing this in a good way, as well as therapists, again, who have been creating those safe containers. This really shows you a visualization of stakeholder model versus the shareholder primacy, right? And you can see here that it's advantageous to bring in your community. We know that when we build with community, when we make sure that community is a part of the development process, we are going to have a better product and a better service, right? So it's integral to make sure that our communities are being brought in from the beginning, right? And that co-creation and co-collaboration is happening from Genesis. And again, this will allow us to build a more successful business that can actually return investments to all shareholders, including investors. I think a lot of investors see stakeholder models and they get worried. They think that maybe they're not going to get a return on investment, right? They're worried that there's going to be issues with the bottom line. That's just not true. We know that when we offer our employees more equity, when we offer our communities equity in our building, our businesses, we're able to create businesses that are sustainable, that can generate wealth for all shareholders within the business, and you have less volatile returns, and you can see that by a lot of just large industrial giants in the space who are using stakeholder models and have been successful in their business and in raising investments. There's two slides left actually, and so this is just a visual of what that looks like. That purpose trust is called the Journey Reciprocity Trust, and again, that holds 10% of equity. And what that could look like in 5 years is over $100 million in a trust that is governed by Indigenous peoples, that supports conservation directly, that supports the preservation and the ecology of plant medicine, and that supports the access to mental health for Indigenous peoples and improving that sector. I'm looking for trustees to be a part of this Journey Reciprocity Trust. Really looking to make sure that this is being stewarded in an intentional way, and that there is representation from our communities on this trust that will actually sit on our board of directors as well. So we'll have a seat on the board of directors that is also a representation of the Journey Reciprocity Trust, to make sure that there's a voice for our stakeholders, and that mechanism to ensure that there's not just folks being seen, but folks being heard. The final there is just the free, prior, and informed consent, which is a protocol I talked about earlier. And that's the way that we're developing the drug development program in consultation with communities and stakeholders, making sure that we're not appropriating the way that the therapeutics are stewarded into community, and making sure that Indigenous communities are part of the wealth creation that's being generated. So I've shared a lot. Journey, Collab, Urban Indigenous Collective, Shock Talk. We've got for-profit, we got not-profit, and I'm happy to be in community and sit down and unpack all of this that I shared with you all today.
Just want to say thank you so much. With that, I will hand it back to Jennifer, but just thank you. And Marnie, your daughter is a powerhouse. Well done. I mean, not surprising, of course, but amazing.
Thank you so much. Or just Yako, Vanessa. It's just truly feeling so much gratitude right now to be able to share my story and just the different ventures and how my testimony plays a role in those. And I just appreciate just the platform and being able to share my Afro-Indigenous voice.